This is a moment in Jewish history. This week was the holiday of Lag BaOmer, which marks the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, in between Passover and Shavuot. This date commemorates the end of the catastrophe that befell the students of Rabbi Akiva during the time of the Romans. One of those students was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who hid from the Romans in a cave. On Lag BaOmer every year, thousands visit his tomb in Meron in northern Israel, except in years when there is a pandemic or war. I have been to this celebration of Rabbi Shimon several times. It was quite an experience. I saw people camping out and a huge bonfire and music that went all night. Food and drink were freely distributed, as well as prayers, singing, and random strangers greeting you warmly to dance with you or offer you barbecue. It is traditional for a 3-year-old boy to get his first haircut on Lag BaOmer, called a halakha, or in Yiddish, upshirin. I was offered by a joyful father to cut a lock of hair from a happy little boy. The actual tomb is in an old stone structure with blue domes and contains the tombs of Rabbi Shimon and his son Elazar. Rabbi Shimon was no fan of the Romans, who were in control of the land of Israel and issued harsh decrees against the Jewish people. The Talmud records that one day Rabbi Shimon was sitting with two of his colleagues discussing the situation, when one said that although the Romans persecuted the Jewish community, they nevertheless built marketplaces, bridges, and bathhouses. But Rabbi Shimon countered by stating, they did everything for their own benefit. They set up the marketplaces for their own pleasure and good. They built bathhouses to indulge in their own pleasure, and they built bridges to be able to charge tolls for using them. When word got around to what he stated, an edict was issued calling for his execution, and Rabbi Shimon and his son fled to a cave. For 12 years they hid, surviving on carob and a spring of water, studying the deep esoteric teachings of the Kabbalah. Finally, when the Roman governor who issued the order died, they returned to the outside world. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is considered one of the greatest sages of ancient Israel, and many songs have been written about him. Klezmer music, the music of the Eastern European Yiddish-speaking Jewish community, was developed further in Meron at the annual Lag BaOmer celebration. Meron Nigun, or Meron melody, has now become a klezmer standard. The mix of the Ashkenazic Jewish music with Sephardic and North African melodies created a uniquely Israeli style of klezmer, and on Lag BaOmer it can be heard all night. Many of these traditions go back many generations. The famous Rabbi Hayyim Vital, a Kabbalist from Tzfat in the 16th century, recorded the following about Lag BaOmer in Meron, which he learned from his teacher, the eminent Rabbi Isaac Luria, the famous Arizal of Tzfat. It is a matter of custom that Israel used to go on the 33rd day of the Omer to the graves of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar, who are buried in the city of Meron, and eat and drink and be happy there. My teacher, the Arizal, may his memory be blessed, came there from Egypt. I do not know if he was then knowledgeable in the wondrous wisdom that he later achieved. And Rabbi Yonatan Sagish testified to me that in the same first year he returned to Israel from Egypt, before I became his student, he took his little son there, with all the members of his household, and shaved his head there according to the well-known custom, and made a day of feasting and rejoicing there. The next description of Lag BaOmer in Meron, which I would like to read to you, comes from Rabbi Hayyim Zvi Sneersohn, who was born in Lubavitch in 1834. He was a great-grandson of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement. Rabbi Sneersohn traveled the world to talk about the difficulties of Jewish communities in Europe and his idea for the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel. He lectured in the United States and in 1869 met with the President Ulysses S. Grant, where he discussed a difficult issue involving the American consul who had an office in Jerusalem and was mixing Christian proselytizing with his diplomatic duties. That consul was removed of his duties after the meeting. In 1872, he published his book Palestine and Romania, a description of the Holy Land and the state of Romanian Jews. And this is how he describes Lag BaOmer. I am reading to you from the original English translation, and you will note the interesting different pronunciations. A most holy place is the grave of Rabbi Simon ben Yochai, one of the oldest rabbis of the Talmud. Near the western part of the city, in a village called Meron, in the court of a Jew, is the grave of Rabbi Simon, on which a synagogue has been built. The whole court, with the many houses therein, belong to Jews. Every year, on the 18th day of the month of Iyar, the anniversary of the death of the rabbi is celebrated in the following way. Thousands and thousands of men and women assemble around the burial ground. It is a day of joy, like a great family festival. They express their happiness by singing songs, dancing and jumping, eating and drinking, all kinds of food being brought there for sale. They shoot with guns, exercise with swords and spears in the manner of the Arabians, and many Arabians also partake of the festival. But it would not be advisable for any Arabian to begin to quarrel with a Jew, for he would risk his life in doing so. Notwithstanding the immense crowd, there is no disorder or quarreling. There is nothing but joy, peace, and harmony, as if the temple had been rebuilt and the Jews were again the masters of the land. In the beginning of the night, the shamus, or sexton, calls hadlaka, that is, light, and then begins the auction of light, for who has the first right to it. The lighting is as follows. Near the grave there is a gutter made of marble and filled with olive oil. The persons who are so rich as to pay for it bring the best cloths of silk, adorned with gold and silver, dip them in the oil, and light and burn them in honor of the rabbi. The most valuable cloths are consumed in this way, and they pour out the oil as freely as if it were water, to make the fire still greater. The exultation at this ceremony is indescribable. The same ceremony takes place on the grave of the son of Rabbi Simon, Rabbi Eliezer. Besides this fire, there are innumerable lamps burning, which by their light change the night into day. All the night throughout they eat and drink, dance and sing, and play timbrels and other instruments. In the morning, everyone says his prayers near the grave. Then they bring the scroll of the Pentateuch into the court. This roll, or Sefer Torah, is richly adorned. It has a golden crown and pomegranates of silver, and is enclosed in a case of silver. It is carried around, while before it they carry a flag of green silk embroidered with gold, adorned with a golden apple and the figure of a rose. This banner is considered that of the tribe of Judah, and the people, on seeing both the flag and the holy roll, give vent to their joy in jubilation and shouting. It is as if the law had just been given to them. Their exultation is far greater than can be described. It is impossible to form even an idea of their joyful enthusiasm and their fiery and passionate merriment. After the procession, they bring the roll into its former place with songs and hymns. There is especially one song in praise of Rabbi Simon which is sung. Then they bring their children with music and song, dressed in the most precious dresses, to the same place. They are brought first to the grave of Rabbi Simon, and then to that of Rabbi Jochanan. Although it is only a 10-minute walk from one grave to the other, the procession being accompanied by song, plays, and fireworks, it takes 2 hours. When there, the hair of the children is cut, with the exception of the forepart of the ear, according to the Jewish custom. This ceremony is called chalakah, that is, cutting of the hair. During this time, rose water is sprinkled on the faces, and wine, brandy, and confectionaries are presented to everyone. There is no minute of rest, but continual singing and shouting. Everyone sings or shouts whatever comes into his mind. As the people gathered there from the most distant places, from Persia, from Media, Babylonia, Damascus, etc., one hears different languages and sees the most different dresses. This ceremony is an old tradition. They say that this festival of Rabbi Simon is a source of great joy to the soul of the great rabbi, seeing the happiness of his co-religionists. You thus see that the Jews of Palestine have their anniversaries when they assemble in praise of those who are gone. That was from the 1800s from Rabbi Hayyim Zvi Sneersohn. Other Jewish sages buried in Meron are both Hillel and Shammai and Yochanan the Sandler. The remains of a synagogue from the 3rd century can be found there, which survived an earthquake. Edward Atkinson, writing in 1877, wrote about his experience as follows. During my 4 years' residence in Palestine, I spent a month in Galilee and camped at Meron, the day of the annual Jewish fete in honor of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The scene was such as I shall never forget. We could scarcely find room to pitch our tent for the crowds of Jews assembled from all parts of the world. Representatives were there not only from Jerusalem and all parts of Palestine, but European Jews and others from America. 2 had come all the way from Calcutta, ostensibly to pray at this holy place. Men, women, and children filled the building over the rabbi's tomb, as well as the surrounding ruins. As night approached, a fire was lighted in the court, and many who had brought offerings of valuable garments, embroidery, shawls, and jewelry threw them into the flames, while old and young joined in frantic dancing and singing round the fire. The dancing, drinking, and singing was kept up the greater part of the night, which happened to be moonlight, and, together with the wild rocky hills around, lighted up partly by the moon and partly by the numerous campfires, constituted the most strangely weird picture I ever beheld. The next morning we visited the ruins of the ancient synagogue, and were struck with the sharpness of the masonry, considering it had stood probably for 17 centuries. The famous archaeologist Edward Robinson, the man who discovered Robinson's Arch in Jerusalem, described it in one of his writings from 1856. Robinson says there is no reason to question that this is the Meron of the Talmud. He describes the tomb of Rabbi Shimon and the domed roofs, and relates writings going back to the 12th century that this is the site of the graves of Hillel and Shammai as well. But Robinson was more interested in the remains of the ancient synagogue. He describes the massive portal and a portion of the front wall, all that remains, which are still standing and measure nearly 10 feet high by 6 feet wide, elaborately sculptured. Today, this giant doorframe and wall still stands. According to tradition, it will continue to stand until the coming of Mashiach, and if it does fall, that is an indication that Mashiach is surely coming soon. A modern Jewish community grew in Meron in the 1800s due to its proximity to the tomb of Rabbi Shimon. Jewish farmers from Kurdistan and later Jewish craftsmen from North Africa created communities in the late 1800s. A yeshiva was built on land purchased near the tomb, but many were forced to flee during the riots of 1936. During the War of Independence in 1948, the surrounding Arab armies invaded Israel and forced the Jewish community out of Meron. Cannons were set up on the hilltop, used to shell the Jewish community of nearby Tzfat. During the war, both Tzfat and Meron were liberated, and the bombing successfully stopped when the tomb of Rabbi Shimon was taken by the newly created Israeli Defense Forces. After the war, Moshav Meron was created by veterans of the IDF, many who had earlier fled Eastern European countries such as Romania. Today, modern Meron is a quiet town, with nearby orchards used to manufacture dried fruit and other produce. There is a community center, schools, stores, and bed and breakfast accommodations for years when tourism is better. This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments and past shows, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, and Shalom.